Once upon a time, there was a great sage named Reb Nachman of Bratslav. He was a very wise and gifted teacher, and he would often say to his students, "Other people tell you stories to put you to sleep. I tell you stories to wake you up." I read a story this week that woke me up, and I hope it does the same for you. Maybe you will find in it some sign of reawakening on this Thanksgiving Shabbat, because even when we think that we are living with our eyes wide open, too often we're still groping in the dark. The story is a tale about a man who is still a motivational speaker to this day, Charlie Plumb, a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy and a fighter pilot in Vietnam. After 75 combat missions, his plane was destroyed by an enemy air-to-surface missile. Plumb ejected and parachuted into enemy territory. He was captured by the Viet Cong. He spent nearly 6 years in a communist Vietnamese prison. Somehow, he survived the ordeal and now lectures on lessons he learned from that harrowing experience. The story goes that one evening, while Charlie Plumb and his wife were out having dinner, a total stranger from another table came over to him and said, "Say, you're Lieutenant Plumb, aren't you? You flew one of those jet fighters in Vietnam from the aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk. You were shot down, right?" "I sure was," Plumb said, "but how did you know that?" "Easy," the man said. "I packed your parachute." Plumb was absolutely stunned and equally grateful. He pumped his hand and added simply, the man did, "I guess it worked." "Sure is an honor meeting you, sir." "No, my good man," Plumb replied. "The honor is all mine. If your chute hadn't worked, I wouldn't be here today." Plumb was sleepless that night. He couldn't stop thinking about this brief conversation. What he couldn't get out of his mind was how often he might have looked at any anonymous sailor aboard ship in a white hat, a bib in the back, and bell-bottom trousers, and not even seen him. Plumb, after all, was a fighter pilot, and this other person was just, well, an ordinary parachute rigger. Plumb thought over and over about the many hours that sailor had spent at a long wooden table somewhere in the bowels of that aircraft carrier, working quietly, weaving the shrouds and folding the silks of each parachute, holding in his hands the fate of someone he didn't even know and would never even meet. Now, every time Plumb is invited to speak, he always begins his message with the same question. He looks out to the faces in the crowd and asks everyone there, "Do you know who has packed your parachute? And if you do, have you ever thanked them for the job they did?" When a fighter pilot is shot down over enemy territory, he needs a whole supply of parachutes, not just his physical parachute. He also needs his mental parachute, his emotional parachute, and his spiritual parachute. And if he ever hopes to survive his ordeal, he will need to call on all of them. All his parachutes need to work. He needs to count on all these parachutes. Every one of us here tonight need somebody somewhere to pack our parachutes. And no one person can pack them all. Actually, all of us pack parachutes ourselves, even if we have no idea that is what we are doing. Parents, teachers, doctors, police, accountants, attorneys, business people, psychologists, relatives, co-workers, the person with me at the cemetery today, overlooked, friends, babies, all of them pack parachutes. We all need parachutes we can count on, and let's face it, we all count on others we seldom notice to pack those parachutes. We're all born of parents who packed our parachutes of values to bail us out in the toughest times. We all carry parachutes from teachers, I hope, who taught us skills and insights to last a lifetime. We all cherish parachutes of friends and companions whose love and loyalty, whose understanding and compassion we never stop needing, but which we too often forget or too often ignore. Most of the time, we never even see them. I imagine each of you can think of someone, a deceased relative, or perhaps even a total stranger, who helped you in the midst of a mess, maybe even on the side of the road, and sent you an unexpected parachute just when you needed it. You know, a random act of kindness worthy of your thanksgiving. The thing about the people who pack our parachutes is that you can't pay them back, because unlike Charlie Plum, you may never meet them. You can't pay them back, but you can pay them forward. Our rabbinic sages said the same thing about living a Jewish life of mitzvah. Any pebble you drop into any pond, they said, sends out circles, ripples that never end. The ripple effect goes on forever. As our tradition teaches, mitzvah goreret mitzvah, one mitzvah leads to another. That's actually the reward of one mitzvah, that it leads to another, which is what always makes doing mitzvahs such a good thing to do. So like Reb Nachman of Breslov, a great story doesn't put us to sleep. It can wake us up. Any of us who awaken from a deep sleep or a needed lazy weekend will find that you and I also have a story to tell, stories about our parachutes. And whether other people are listening to our story isn't important. All that matters is if we're listening to ourselves. Life is not always wonderful, but it is always wonder-filled. Let me repeat that. Life is not always wonderful, but it is always wonder-filled. And whenever we pack a parachute for somebody else, we fill that person's life, and we fill this world maybe with wonder, but definitely with more godliness, more wings of God through our own random acts of kindness and thanksgiving. Doesn't matter who you are or where you're from. Doesn't matter when you were born either, which in closing brings us back to this week's Torah portion. Most ancient and even modern cultures, many of them, favor firstborn children and older siblings over the younger siblings. But in the Torah and in the Hebrew Bible, birth order is not destiny. Moses was a younger brother. So was Jacob, as we learned this week, and Joseph in the weeks ahead. Even King David was the youngest of 9. So whether we are an only daughter, an only child, with no children of our own, as the hero Charlie Plum learned, having dinner in some random restaurant on a weekend like this, we can all pack parachutes for somebody else. Why? Because that's what it means to be a child of God. That's what it means to be a Jew. That's why we're here, to pay forward with gratefulness and thanksgiving the parachutes others we cannot ever fully know or repay gave to us. And let us say, Amen.